The Navigation Acts primarily dealt with the Dutch threat because of their monopoly on European shipping trade. This growing enmity and rivalry over international trade and manufacturing, especially with the New World colonies, exploded into three Anglo-Dutch wars. This painting from the Second Anglo-Dutch War of 1665 to 67. The relationship between the English and the Dutch can be split into three distinct eras. Between 1609 and 1649, the Dutch dominance and beginning of a commercial rivalry. Between 1649 and 74, England's navy is stronger and the rivalry develops into conflict and war. And then between 1674 and 88, the joining together against France, ending in the merger of 1688 with the Glorious Revolution. The intention of this lecture is for you to be able to explain how the Anglo-Dutch rivalry changed over time. Firstly, knowledge-wise, you'll be able to explain the different phases of rivalry between the years 1625 and 1688. Skills-wise, analyse the impacts of the Anglo-Dutch rivalry on both the Dutch and English. Then behaviourally, evaluate the reasons for the contrasting views on the cause of the rivalry. The reasons for the longevity of the rivalry can be seen in this extract from Jack S. Levy's work. Levy states, the conflicting economic interests of England and the Netherlands were reinforced by a conflict of ideology between English mercantilism and Dutch economic liberalism, though these ideologies closely paralleled the economic interests of each side. Mercantilism is different from liberalism in that mercantilism places controls via tariffs and duties to exploit trade to the benefit of one group, whereas liberalism, or laissez-faire, where there is no government intervention in trade, allowing the market to control trade, not the government. Levy goes on to explain this difference with examples. English writers asserted that power and wealth were mutually reinforcing, that economic activity should promote the mutual interests of the merchants and the state. The Dutch, by contrast, articulated doctrines of economic liberalism and the principle of the freedom of the seas. Dutch political leaders and merchants alike perceived war as a costly and inefficient activity and strongly preferred peace to war because it allowed them to pursue expansive trade policies abroad while lowering taxes and the national debt at home. The role of the state was to promote a liberal trading order and a peaceful international system. Economic activity and diplomacy were separate. Rivalry over trade, especially with the East, sums up the competition that existed between the Dutch and English. In 1600, the English East India Company was founded, and 2 years later the United East India Company in the Netherlands. Both traded spices, received the same price and paid the same in the acquisition of the goods. Nevertheless, the Dutch profits were higher. This was for two reasons. Firstly, the Dutch were closer to their government who provided capital and assistance. Secondly, with more shareholders who wanted maximum returns for their investment, took their dividends annually rather than the end of each journey, causing greater efficiency. By 1625, the Dutch overtook the English, returning 65 ships to England's 35 between 1615 and 1625. Though war did not erupt until 1652, in this time the tensions did lead to hostilities, including the seizure of 4 English ships by the Dutch between 1617 and 1619. This early rivalry withheld the British economy from growing, certainly where combined with the slower growth of London in the first half of the century. For both companies, it was way more than just trade with the East. There was also competition over American colonies, seen with the capture of New Amsterdam, renamed New York, in 1664 from the Dutch. Also, the ability of the Netherlands to finish and dye the cloth traded with them caused tensions because the Dutch captured the majority of the profit when they re-exported the product to the rest of Europe. 1/5 the Dutch population were employed in fishing and fished in the same waters in the North Sea. Charles I claimed these waters in 1635 and demanded all vessels make a salute to English ships in the English Channel and North Sea. Both sides also captured each other's vessels, However, the English used to deliberately search out and seize the Dutch vessels in their water. In 1651, 2 years since the end of the Civil War and the execution of Charles I, alongside the uprisings in Ireland and in Scotland, the Rump Parliament committed itself to economic improvement. To do this, they looked to the seas and passed the Navigation Act of 1651. In 1652, when a Dutch ship refused to salute an English vessel, a short naval battle resulted, sparking the First Dutch War in July 1652. The Navigation Act mutated the rivalry into war as it strengthened the British economy by excluding the Dutch from trade. When Cromwell became Lord Protector in 1653, he hoped for an alliance with the Dutch and ended the war with the Treaty of Westminster in 1654. The Dutch agreed to saluting English ships in English waters, and that William III would not become head of state due to a fear he would assist the restoration of the monarchy. The treaty failed to resolve the underlying causes of the war and led to several crises in the 1650s and 60s. The Anglo-Spanish War affected Dutch trade and almost reignited war, and in 1658 both sides sent fleets to intervene in a war between Sweden and Denmark. However, the English withdrew due to Dutch superiority and the crisis at home with Richard Cromwell. The Restoration in 1660 saw the amended Navigation Act of 1660 reignite old enmities between the Dutch and English. The exclusion of the Dutch from trade with English colonies greatly strengthened the Stuart economy. Charles II also deeply insulted the Dutch when he demanded that foreign ships did not fish within 10 miles of the British coastline. This was further exacerbated when Mary Stuart, Charles II's sister, died, leaving Charles as the guardian of the young William of Orange. This worried the Dutch merchants as the possibility of Stuart rule over the Netherlands. Rivalry over the growth of colonial possessions saw increases in tension. In 1663, Charles issued a royal charter to the Royal African Company, which gave them a monopoly over the West African trade. This was a direct attack on the Dutch, who had laid claim previously to the region. In 1664, a skirmish followed the capture of several Dutch trading posts, and a number of English ships were destroyed, resulting in Charles ordering a blockade of Dutch ships in the English Channel. In January 1665, the Dutch declared war on England, and they were much better prepared than the English, paying Denmark to join them. The Second Dutch War of 1665 to 1667 happened at the wrong time for the English. The Great Plague of 1665 and the Fire of London in 1666 demoralised the English, and they were further humiliated when the Dutch sailed up the Thames and captured the warship Royal Charles. The outcome of the war was a relaxation of the Navigation Act, affecting the British economy, impacting the City of London. Also during the war, it was difficult for merchants to find insurers to cover their voyages. The Treaty of Dover in 1670 called for England to help France fight the Dutch. The Third Dutch War broke out in 1672, called for British seas to be free of Dutch ships, with favourable English international trade. Parliament feared that if Charles II remained in the war, it would lead to absolutism, forced Charles II to sign the Second Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which took relationships back to 1667. Generally, the British economy gained an advantage when peace treaties were signed, however suffered during the actual wars. Public and political opinion was against war because merchants suffered greatly from the Anglo-Dutch wars. Commercial interests had very little to do with the end of the rivalry, however. It was more to do with political and religious factors in Britain. When William III became the stockholder of the Dutch Republic in 1672, not necessarily a monarch, but the powers were the same, and married Mary, James II's eldest daughter, Charles joined the Dutch against France. When Louis declared Protestantism illegal in France in 1685, refugees fled to England and Holland, creating a mutual anti-French feeling. Then, of course, the merger in 1688 of the Glorious Revolution to replace James II ended the rivalry entirely. The intention of this lecture was for you to be able to explain how the Anglo-Dutch rivalry changed over time. Firstly, knowledge-wise, you should now be able to explain the different phases of the rivalry between the years 1625 and 1688. Skills-wise, we will need to analyse the impacts of the Anglo-Dutch rivalry on both the Dutch and English via the associated material. Then behaviourally, evaluate the reasons for the contrast in views on the cause of the rivalry in the associated material. Now complete the associated material.